Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Oh Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Now there will be a class by His Grace Mukunda Datta Prabhu on the Bhagavad Gita.
Hare Krishna. So thank you very much for coming. We have the great honor and privilege of having with us His Grace Mukunda Datta Prabhu. Mukunda Datta Prabhu is originally from Los Angeles, California, and he joined the Krishna consciousness movement at the age of 15, and which was 75 or 1975. He's been a practicing devotee since then. He served in what was back then the best book distribution team in North America, the Radha Damodar Party. He traveled around and distributed books for several years. After that, he became a Sanskrit scholar and also learned Indian classical music. He's served on the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, which is the publisher of all the books of Srila Prabhupada, and is a prolific scholar. He's commented and helped with, including actually the 11th and 12th cantos of the Bhagavatam that we read right now. He was involved in that. So we're very fortunate to have his association here. Thank you very much for coming, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshur-unmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual master has opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge, and I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. We're discussing today, this microphone is attacking, from Bhagavad Gita as it is. Bhagavad Gita is an ancient Sanskrit treatise on spiritual knowledge, very famous, well known. And I myself read many editions of Bhagavad Gita before I found this particular edition, Bhagavad Gita as it is. When I first saw it, I thought, that sounds like a very presumptuous title, Bhagavad Gita as it is. What about all the other editions that I had read already? But then when I read this Bhagavad Gita, I realized that I could understand it. The other editions that I had read, I didn't understand because the persons who published them also didn't understand them. But in the years since then, I've confirmed many times over that what Srila Prabhupada is writing in his purports or commentaries to the verses of this edition are just transparently representing that of a long, long line of saintly persons in what we call disciplic succession or Guru Parampara for centuries. Very, very old tradition. So today we're going to discuss a couple of verses from chapter 6. Chapter 6 is entitled Dhyana Yoga, Dhyana. Dhyana means meditation. Everyone heard of the word Zen? It's pretty popular, yeah. Zen actually comes from Chinese word Chan, and the Chinese word Chan comes from the Sanskrit word Dhyan, and the Sanskrit word Dhyana means focus, meditation. If you take a magnifying lens and you collect all the rays of the sun that are dissipated throughout the sky, and you collect them into one pinpoint, especially if you're in California, and you focus that on some dry grass, you can burn down half the western United States. It happens every summer, somebody does it. half of them are arsans. But anyway, focus or dhyan, meditation, it's a very valuable skill to have. And Krishna is talking about mystic yoga in particular. Sometimes we see many yoga studios, it's become popular in the last 30 years or so. People are practicing Ashtanga yoga, that's coming from Patanjali Muni, a great sage. So, yoga means actually to connect, to unify oneself is maybe a better way to put it. Yoga, to be joined or to be connected or unified with the Supreme. And there are many ways that people try to do this, but in this day and age, it's very difficult to do anything other than chanting. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, as we were just doing. So we'll say more about that. For now, I'll just recite the Sanskrit myself. Shuchau deshe pratisthapya sthiram asanam atmanah natyuchritam nati nicham chailajina kushottaram tatraikagram manah kritva yata chittendriya kriyah ubhavishyasane yunjad yogam atma vishuddhaye. That means, to practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deerskin and a soft cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and to practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling the mind, senses, and activities, and fixing the mind on one point. The purport by Srila Prabhupada. Sacred place refers to places of pilgrimage. In India, the yogis, the transcendentalists, or the devotees, all leave home and reside in sacred places such as Prayag, Mathura, Vrindavana, Hrishikesha, and Hardwar, and in solitude practice yoga where the sacred rivers like the Yamuna and the Ganges flow. But often this is not possible, especially for Westerners. The so-called yoga societies in big cities may be successful in earning material benefit, but they are not at all suitable for the actual practice of yoga. One who is not self-controlled and whose mind is not undisturbed cannot practice meditation. Therefore, in the Brihanaradiya Purana, it is said that in the Kali Yuga, the present yuga or age, when people in general are short-lived, slow in spiritual realization, and always disturbed by various anxieties, the best means of spiritual realization is chanting the holy name of the Lord. And then he quotes, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama Eva Kevalam, Kalau Nastyeva, Nastyeva, Nastyeva Gatiranyatha. That means, in this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is chanting the holy name of the Lord. There is no other way. There is no other way. There is no other way. When we're in school or in college, if the teacher writes something on the board twice, that means it's definitely going to be on the test. So here we've got the same thing repeated 3 times in the Brihanaradiya Purana. This is not just an ISKCON invention. This is coming from a long, long time back. All over India, people are chanting this mantra. It's actually a Shruti mantra. Those who know, Vedic literatures are divided into 2 categories, Shruti and Smriti. And the Shruti has unassailable authority, according to those who are faithful. So, the Shruti mantra itself is giving us this mantra, and the Puranas, or the Smritis that corroborate the Shrutis, such as Brihanaradiya Purana, they're telling us that This is what you have to do practically in this day and age. Many people try to practice yoga. Well, let's take a look at what Krishna says here. Tatraikagram manaha kritva yata chittendriya kriyaha. He makes a point that, first of all, you have to fix your mind. You have to be one-pointed determination. That's pretty hard for people in this day and age. Pretty hard to do, to fix your mind. Sometimes people who claim to be teaching yoga, they say, oh, you can just fix your mind on a candle flame or on whatever. But actually in the Shastra it says you have to fix your mind on God. Dhyanavastita tadgatena manasa pashyanti yam yoginaha. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, the yogis are those who fix their minds on the Supreme. So the first thing is that we have to fix our mind very carefully, and that's not an easy thing to do. The mind is always running around. The mind is more agitated than your tongue. If you stick out your tongue in the mirror, you can try to hold it still and see how far you get. The mind is like that. And even a very highly qualified person like Arjuna, to whom Bhagavad Gita is addressed, he's telling Krishna honestly, frankly, that I don't think I can do this. And this was 5,000 years ago, when people were much more qualified than we are now. I think it's universal experience, as far as I can tell. Everyone, in every generation, in every part of the world, they all confirm that their parents' generation was better in general. And we get dumbed down with each generation, it seems, and we become a little more lazy, and we lose a little bit more wisdom, and we're not so sincere even. So Kali Yuga, or the present age that Prabhupada mentions in his purport, is like this. It's been described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're unlucky, we're short-lived, we have all kinds of disturbances, we're not so bright, we're lazy, and we're easily misled. So with all these disadvantages, it's not really very easy to try to do something that Arjuna said he couldn't do 5,000 years ago. So, tatraigagram manaha kritva. First, fix your mind. But it is possible to fix the mind. We'll get to that in a moment. And then what does he say? What is the symptom of someone who has fixed the mind? If you have controlled your mind. Yatta chitta means actually the mind is dominated. We are mostly dominated by our minds. The mind gives us a command, we instantly obey, no questions asked. And that gets us into trouble all the time. So when someone tries to control that process, then we find very, very quickly it's not so easy to do, very difficult to do, but it is possible. So the symptom of somebody who has actually controlled the mind, that means practically the symptom of somebody who is actually practicing yoga properly is that that person's senses are under control. My god sister Govinda Dasi, who used to be Srila Prabhupada's servant and secretary in the early days of ISKCON, like around 1967, 69, she went to some event at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. This is before she became a devotee of Krishna. And she saw that there's all kinds of people saying all kinds of things, just like it's now on the internet. You can find just about anything and everything. So people claiming to be authorities saying so many things. So Timothy Leary was there, and he was preaching, turn on, tune in, drop out, take LSD, in other words. And somebody else was there saying something else, Allen Ginsberg. And then there was a man called the Buddha. The man called Buddha, they called him. And so he was speaking all high words, but Govinda Dasi noticed he's holding a beer can. So what kind of realization is that? He's not even in control, even in public, even while lecturing, he cannot control this. So this is our problem. We may think we're self-realized, we may think we're very spiritually advanced, but from time to time, we fall. There was one English poet who said, "Strange fits of passion I have known, and I should dare to tell. But only in the lover's ear what once to me befell." He's lucky it only happened once. But anyway, the point is, yata chitta, your mind has to be controlled, yata endriya, the senses also have to be controlled, and yata kriya, activities therefore should follow. When Arjuna asks Krishna elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita, how do I tell who's really self-realized, who's really spiritually advanced? How do I tell practically? Who knows what Krishna tells him? Nobody's read Bhagavad Gita? The saffron ones, I know they've read. Yeah.
That it is hard to control the mind by practice and renunciation.
No, that's the answer to a different question. When Arjun asks, how do I recognize a person who has done this? What does he say? Yes.
His senses are controlled like the tortoise.
Yes. He's able to say no. Every day our mind is pushing us around to do this and to do that. And yoga means that you make the determined decision that, no, I refuse. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. That is actually the sign of a person who's self-realized, a person who is experiencing something deeper on the inside than the things that distract us on the outside. That's the sign. That kind of tranquility, that kind of determined effort, that kind of wisdom also, it has to be there. So, this is, the first verse here, there are two verses given. The first one is just detail, how to sit, where to sit, etc., describing this asana, or sitting place. But the real instruction here is, upavishyasane yunjyad yogam atma vishuddhaye. Having sat there like this, having controlled your mind, your senses, and your activities, all three, then you should execute yoga practice. And for what purpose? This is the next big deal in this verse. What is the purpose that we're practicing yoga? Why are we practicing yoga? Srila Prabhupada hints at this in his purport. Their so-called yoga societies in big cities may be successful in earning material benefit, but they are not at all suitable for the actual practice of yoga. The people who are teaching yoga have material motives in mind, and the people who are so-called taking the yoga classes also, they've also, they're interested in weight reduction, they're interested in improving their sex life, they want to be cool, they do so whatever. So many wrong reasons that people claim to be practicing yoga when they're actually not. So sometimes one of our predecessor teachers, acharyas, he said, in this mature world you find only two kinds of people, only two. One is the person who is cheating, and the other is the person who is cheated. And most of us, unfortunately, we're a mix of both. Sometimes we're cheating, and sometimes we're being cheated. Here's the golden rule. If you are cheating, you will be cheated. So, sense control is important because you cannot be cheated if there's no weakness in you. Every thief knows that you have to find a person's weakness and you have to exploit that. So, yoga practice means to become very determined and to become very sober and to become very, first and foremost, I would say, sense-controlled here. And the purpose for which we are practicing yoga is not to lose weight or not to make money being a yoga teacher or whatever other things that people practice yoga for. Here it's stated, Atma Vishuddhaye. Atma Vishuddhaye means your purpose is Atma Vishuddhi, especially to purify yourself. This is mentioned several times in Bhagavad Gita. How do we purify ourselves? You can't really purify the soul because the soul is by nature always pure. It doesn't require purification, but the soul is now under siege by our decision to fixate our attention on this mind-body complex. We're all actually eternal spiritual beings. We are not these material bodies, but we are incarcerated within these bodies. It's just like a prison. And we're, on account of attachment to this conditional existence, we find it very hard to practice spiritual life. Why? Because the mind has become habituated, habitual offenders. We have a criminal, mentality in which we're always trying to cheat ourselves or cheat others, and we're always trying to let go of our sense control, and we're always being taken for a ride by the material energy as a result. And so we're locked into this bodily concept of life, bodily misconception of life, because we're not this body. The Vedas teach, aham brahmasmi, I am spirit. This is our real identity. We are spiritual beings. But on account of misidentification with matter, through perverted desire to enjoy apart from the Supreme, then we have been blessed with a false ego. And that false ego is what I want to say precipitates a succession of material births, one after another, reincarnation. As long as we are lured by the carrot, so to speak, of all modes of material happiness, so-called happiness in this world, that long we will have to continue taking birth in order to enjoy those things, because it's what we want. If we can free ourselves from material desires, I don't say free ourselves from desire altogether. It is natural for the soul to desire things, just as it's natural for the soul to love. And it's natural to engage in activities. These things are all, what we want is actually natural to the soul, but it is unnatural in this world when applied to the body. It doesn't work. We have eternal aspirations in this world. Everybody wants to make plans as if they were going to stay here forever, but nobody does. Everyone is kicked out at a certain point. And so we're just asking for trouble. Only 3 things can happen. What 3 things? Number 1, you don't have sufficient credits. Your credit score is insufficient to get what you want. That means you don't have proper karma. You can't get what you want. Everybody wants to be a millionaire. Not everybody does. Everybody wants to be happy in this material world, but you cannot get what you want sometimes. At least some of the time you cannot get what you want. The second thing that happens is you get what you want, but you find out it's actually not all that it's cracked up to be. And so you become bored with it and move on to something else. That's also usual. And if neither of those two is operating, then what happens? You get what you want and you like what you want, but because everything in this world is temporary, you lose it. The Buddha said, this was one of his main things. Everything here is suffering because everything here is temporary. Now, early on in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, what's the difference between reality and illusion? Anybody know the answer? The orange ones know. What is the difference between truth and untruth, or between reality and illusion? Those things which never end, that's real. And those things which cannot endure, that's not real. So we're totally invested, completely invested in things that are going to evaporate one day. People who will die or leave us or betray us, or experiences that are just momentary, fleeting, or things that we try to hold on to but cannot because the karma is working, and when the time's up, the time's up. You can't say anything about it. Somebody else is running this thing. That's another point to consider. Somebody else is in charge, and there's obviously intelligence in this universe. Things are going on very deliberately, very, carefully calibrated, that everything goes on nicely, but not according to our wishes. So, we're locked in this karmic cycle of repeated birth and death on account of our unrealistic attachment to some hope that will never be fulfilled. Another English poet, I like poetry, so I quote them aloud. He said, "Sick with desire, chained to a dying animal, he knows not who he is." This is our position. And, this is the person who was not practicing Krishna consciousness even who wrote this, but it's just common sense. So people need to use some common sense and consider, how am I going to make real advancement in this short time, the short window of opportunity that we call human life? What am I going to do here while I can? This is the real purpose of human life. We have nice words for these things in Sanskrit. This is called shreyas, as opposed to preyas. Preyas means something that's immediately appealing and very attractive and very habit-forming, but not necessarily very good for you. And preyas means things which are not necessarily very appealing at the outset, and there may even be a little difficult to attain, but they are ultimately preeminently super excellent, ultimately superior things. So spiritual life, spiritual realization, this is the prerogative of the human being, and it is the highest thing that will actually make us happy, actually. So yoga is meant for that. And this dhyana yoga, as we said, is one kind of yoga. But it's not really, we'll see in the coming verses, if we keep coming back, we'll see that Arjuna himself says, I don't think I can do this. And Krishna agrees, yeah, it's actually true. And at the end of this chapter, what does Krishna say about practicing yoga? Who knows? The best yogi. Yoginam api sarvesham madgatena antaratmana ityadi. That means, out of all the yogis, Krishna says, I think the one who is actually just humbly worshiping me in great and transcendental faith, he's the best situated of all. Now, actually, there's two answers to this question, because there's two verses in which Krishna mentions the best of the yogis. Anybody know another one? This is harder. How about text number 32 of the 6th chapter? Anybody know it? Atmaupamyena sarvatra samam pashyati Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukham sa yogi paramo mata. Krishna says, I consider that yogi to be the best of yogis who has empathy. A lot of talk about empathy, but real empathy means to feel what another person is feeling, to understand another person, non-verbally. I once felt in my life a great lack of such empathy. And I was thinking hard about it, and I asked one of my respected seniors, where does this come from? How do you get this? He just shrugged and he said, it's a gift from above. It's not a skill or a technique that you can practice. It's actually, it's a very deep thing that is just gifted upon us after a long, long practice of spiritual discipline and purification of the heart. But somebody who has empathy, Krishna says, is the best of all the yogis. So yeah, there's two answers to that question, but both of them are acceptable as far as I'm concerned. If you have real empathy, it must be spiritual empathy. And if you are practicing this bhakti yoga process, then Krishna says you're also the best of all the yogis. So, Srila Prabhupada has therefore made it very easy for us in his commentary on this verse, because he directly states, how do we practice this yoga in this modern degraded age? How do we fix our minds? How do we control our senses? How do we reform our activities? The people go to these reform groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, or people have anger management problems, all kinds of addiction problems. Actually, all of us are addicts. We're all addicted to what? This false ego, the false conception of life that pushes us to do stupid things in this world. It's like a ball and chain we carry around with us. But in this age, it's very easy because we're so, I want to say, disadvantaged, disempowered, maybe. Therefore, there's a special dispensation for us. You have simply to focus your mind on this sound vibration. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And we can see practically that those persons who have seriously adopted this practice of bhakti yoga and who are sincerely chanting this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, bona fide ancient mantra. Actually, mantra, what does mantra mean? Mantra, mananat trayate iti mantraha. By the sound vibration that turning it over again and again in your mind, it delivers you. If you will allow, I'll quote one more English poet. Everybody know Robert Frost? You've heard the name Robert Frost, famous. So he wrote a poem called Devotion. And in this poem he says, let me see if I can remember it. The ear can think of no devotion greater than being sure to the ocean, counting an endless repetition, holding a curve in fixed position. I don't know what that meant to him, but it sounds a lot like japa to me. When we chant on these beads, everybody has these beads in these little bags you see us carrying around. They're 108 beads, and we chant one mantra on each bead, 108 times, one mala. And we're counting an endless repetition of this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in an effort to tame our minds and tame our senses and tame our activities. So this we can do while we have a sound mind and body. Rest assured, you will lose your sound mind and body. It will be taken away from you. That is 100% guaranteed. It's not a threat. But this is reality of this world. My father passed away. He had cancer. And he was spared a long, slow death by Krishna's grace. Usually spinal cancer is very painful and slow death. But he went early. One of the things that just really struck me when I was visiting him many, many times in the hospital was the condition of all the other patients in the hospital. Because I could see somebody's lost his mind, someone else is having a heart attack, somebody can't control his bowels, someone else is having breathing difficulties. There's so many things. A gunshot wound comes in on the gurney suddenly. I mean, so many things that can take us out of this material world. And they happen every day. Every day the doctors see these things. And so it's a very, Shankaracharya said it very poetically also. He said, Nalini dalagata jalamati taralam tadvad jivitam atashaya chapalam. What does that mean? Like a drop of water on the waxy surface of a lotus leaf. And gone. It's very tenuous. It's there on the leaf of the lotus flower, but any minute it can be gone. This life is even more flighty than that, even more flickering than that. So use it or lose it, as they say. We have to get a grip on this cold, hard reality of our own impending death, and we have to do what we can with whatever time we have left. The easy way we have as well. It's been handed to us on a silver platter. Just chant. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is not yet explicit in this verse until we read Srila Prabhupada's purport, but as we see, and I mentioned earlier, Krishna himself will bring the discussion to this point as well by the end of the chapter. And then for the rest of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is dilating on this and explaining it in more detail and giving instructions to Arjuna. And at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, yes, my illusions is dispelled now, and I'm ready to do whatever you say. So we should also become like this. I'm going to stop now, but if anyone has any questions or any comments, we welcome your input. Okay.
You're talking about being empathetic, but that seems very, very hard in this world too, because it can be so overwhelming, because there's so much, you know, you can only put yourself in so many other people's shoes. So how do we meet out our empathy?
I think former President Carter's wife was a resident of this city, is it not? Jimmy Carter, that's a long time ago. But, so one time she met with one of our movement's leaders, Tamal Krishna Goswami, and she complained of a similar problem because if you know her or about her, she was very much interested in helping other people in as many ways as she could. And so she said, you know, how do we, you know, it's, if you can only give so much, you know, how do we do that without burning ourselves out? Anybody here a nurse by any chance? No nurses here? That's a profession with a high turnover rate because it's heavy stress. And even school teachers, same. It's very, very difficult. You know, the things that people get paid for, you know, like athletes and entertainers, I mean, you know, the amount of sacrifice that those persons perform is not the same as these other professions. But anyway, I don't want to divert too much. But so she said, yeah, how do we meet out, as you said, our empathy or maybe our sympathy and our assistance without getting burnt out? We have to be connected, as we said in the beginning. Yoga means connection. It's like a current. It's like an electric current. If you hold the plug into the wall, then that current is running, and whatever you connect it with, it's going to have infinite energy. It will not burn out. If we are transparent, we can act as such a conduit for others by receiving mercy and passing it on. And we'll get more enlivened the more we do for other people. As you said, that's something that's very rare and it's very difficult. And as I said, it's not something that happens very easily. It takes years. But is there anything else worth working for in life? The satisfaction even that we ourselves get from that endeavor is superior to everything else. If you're really a evolved human being, to any extent evolved human being. So we have to connect. And that connection means we have to be transparent. By transparent, I mean whatever comes our way, we selflessly embrace that and we engage that in service to the Supreme and service to humanity. Selflessly. We have to become selfless. That's really what it comes down to. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said very powerfully, he prayed that I want to be more humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, ready to offer respect to everyone and not expecting respect for myself. Can you think of a more difficult thing to eat than that? Very, very hard pill to swallow. But if we can do that, we have this transparency that allows us to be an infinite conduit for helping others. And that is a successful human life. What else is there worth living for, really? Hope that answers your question. Anything else? Yes?
I would like to ask a question about the Atman and the extent to which we should make that our identity. Tat Twamasi, I am Brahmin.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the correct approach? Instead of identifying with the body-mind complex, as you called it, should we consciously, and I know the mantra helps us to do that, but is it a difficult or impossible notion even to identify oneself as the Atman as opposed to the body-mind?
Very nice question. Thank you very much. you have understood, and it's a very nice question. Yes, we have to focus our minds. We have to constantly remind ourselves, I mean to say, that we are not this material body, we are spiritual beings. Somebody the other day asked me, how do we become very serious about spiritual life? I told them, set your alarm clock for 5 times a day, and every time it rings, you just consider, what if I died right now? Where would I go? As we know from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, whatever we think about at the time of death, that's the state that we attain. So it's a very risky position that we're in this world. But as spiritual beings, we want to act like spiritual beings. And it's very easy to become distracted by the conditioning, I said, as the conditional existence that we're in. We're habituated to sense gratification on account of the conditioning of the false ego, and we can't remember our real ego. But we don't necessarily have to make an artificial attempt to focus on something vague or ethereal called Atman. That's not what we're talking about. We just have to keep this understanding in the forefront that, what are my priorities? Do they reflect the fact that I'm actually a spiritual being, or are they more appropriate for someone who is a material body, which we aren't? That intelligence we have to keep and cultivate. That's why we study Bhagavad Gita. Intelligence alone is not going to take us to the supreme perfection, but it's very necessary. And as you said, by chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra, the heart is also purified meanwhile. And that's also important, because you can memorize every verse of Bhagavad Gita, but if your heart is still black, what is the point? You're just going to exploit the book to try and exploit others. So that happens also, we see. But yeah, we have to make this effort, and we have to pray, as we said in regard to the previous question. We have to pray for that connection and pray to maintain that connection, and chanting constantly is the best way to do that. The verse I mentioned from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in which he wants to become more humble than a blade of grass, etc. He's saying, I want this because then I can chant your name constantly. That's the real thing. To be constantly connected with the Supreme is to be constantly connected with his name in this age. What our relationship with the holy name is, that is our relationship with God. So this much we have to do. I hope that's helpful. Anything else? Yes, please.
You said being empathetic means to understand someone else or people around you, but how to increase tolerance if you are not okay with that person, or
Yeah, well, he said there's an order of operations here, right? Just like in algebra, you have whatever's in the parentheses, you have to do that first. So similarly, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us an order of operations. What's the first thing? You have to be more humble than a blade of grass. What is it to be lower than the grass? What is lower than the grass? Dirt. So you have to be very, very humble. And humility is defined by this tolerance. If you are more humble than a blade of grass, then there's nothing you cannot tolerate. And yeah, there's many poetic ways of saying this, and Bhagavatam has said it in so many ways as well. But these qualities, they come from chanting. Chanting will make us humble. Because the more we reflect on our spiritual identity, and the more we're hearing from Bhagavad Gita and other such scriptures and applying those instructions, that's another thing we have to do. It's not sufficient just to hear them. You have to actually, it's understood, you're going to apply them. Just like, if they bring me a glass of water, or if I ask for a glass of water, and someone is very scrupulously taking notes and understanding every word, yes, I understand what this means, but he doesn't actually do it, he's not understood. So Bhagavad Gita has to be heard, and then it has to be applied. And then the holy name we have to chant. with great concentration and sincerity. What kind of sincerity? Srila Prabhupada said, like a child crying for its mother. Are we there yet? Maybe not. So this is what we have to work on. And then the tolerance will automatically come, and then we will automatically give respect to all others because of our own humility. We will automatically not expect any honor because of the same. The humility has to come first. The humility. It's a very underappreciated virtue in the modern day and age, is it not? You know, I was in India. I actually live in India, and I was in Hyderabad once, and I saw the billboards. All the billboards are advertising schools, because anybody from India, you know, big schools going up everywhere, all over the place. It's a big business. But, you know, they're advertising these schools. Turn your child into a leader. And there's a person with a very confident pose, and, you know, I mean, nobody wants to, you can't sell anything like that if you say, make your child more humble than a blade of grass. Who's going to do that? I don't think so, but it's an open secret. If somebody actually does that, then you get all these wonderful realizations and virtues and spiritual advancement that enables you to do impossible things, as we were saying. So it's a counterintuitive sort of a thing. We're thinking that if I become more humble than the blade of grass, then everybody's going to step on me. And it's true. But that doesn't mean that you have to enable abuse. That's another thing. And it doesn't mean that you're just suffering from low self-esteem. It's a real virtue, humility, and it's a valuable one. It can take us so far. We have to appreciate that, at least in theory. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this is his central dictum. And this Krishna consciousness, chanting Hare Krishna, will enable us to approach that ideal. Is that helpful? Okay. Anything else? I don't know what time it is now. Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you all very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Okay, yeah, I can do that. Bring the one we used this morning. Okay. I like that. So we'll do a little kirtan, chanting now.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hey. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So thank you very much for coming to our Spiritual Sunday program. I have a few quick announcements before we honor Prasadam. So